Dr. Jazz.
But man, thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Oh,
You know,
of course.
I've followed your music, kind of found about you through Pat Martino, obviously, kind of being a guitarist. But then, listened to other stuff you've done, and it's amazing. You're such a great composer and piano player, and uh, you know, want to dig into your playing a little bit. I mean, what you've done today. So
Well, thank you. Thanks for, I mean, checking out the other music too.
yeah.
I appreciate that. We all appreciate that, right?
Oh man, yeah. It's always when you hear that you're like, oh, okay, cool. Well, it's nice. But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about ask for the ancient path to start this talk with. The compositions that you wrote on that one. I mean, this is the last one I heard from you. Maybe I'm really bad there, but
No, that's the most recent, and
that's the most recent
a trio recording of standards. But yeah, Ask for the Ancient Path is original music. Yeah.
I mean, how did you, when I listen to the tunes, it's like, I'll start just with your compositional approach. I mean, I think you've been quite a prolific composer through the years, and when I listen to this one, especially, I mean, I'm such a fan of Scott Robinson. By the way, he's like one of the most underrated players out there, and you guys seem to blend on that record so beautifully. Also, the instrumentation he chose for some of the tunes, and I mean, first of all, two questions: how did you gather that band together? And I mean, I know all the guys and are really good. And how do you actually compose music? Because you have all of these tunes have some mystery about them, but it's always about the melody also. And so yeah, there you go.
Well, the first question, I know of those three players, Scott and Martin and Tim. I know Tim the longest, Tim Horner on drums, and he and I have played together. Well, it's probably 20 years, and then Scott not long after that, and Martin, relatively the same time, and so. As far as that particular combination of players, I think we had played together maybe Martin's music or maybe Scott, like kind of,
Okay.
one-off kind of things over the years, because as you know, I mean, we're just all freelancers. But for this particular recording, I mean, anytime I record, it's which is I think it's quite common, but it's like I have specific people in mind.
Yeah.
And I also have, it's also accessibility, because I play with these musicians then, and we have a good rapport, and they're also very nice people that I know will we can get something together. So, and then speaking of Scott, I mean, he's a multi-instrumentalist, as you know, and just an amazing improviser. Anyway, with these players in mind, the compositions tend to take shape with that. Although I think a couple of them were they were written but had never been really performed or anything like that. So, with that in mind, with Scott, for instance, on one of the tunes or a couple tunes where he's playing bass sax, I mean, it's just, there's not that many players who, you hear a lot of baritone, but not bass so much. And he's just so lyrical and swinging with that, and of course, so it can go from kind of straight ahead, and it can go out, and that's the beauty of Scott and Tim and Martin, because it's a wide spectrum of expression, and that's same for me. I like to, to play in these kind of stretch out or in, and also the use of space, like on the one piece that's more of a kind of a classical, it's called Via Canonica.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah.
That has, like periods of quiet, still playing, but also space, and that's one of my favorite pieces, because it's composed, but it also has free improvisation in it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I like that
to
one,
answer
San
the
Sebastian.
first question, I guess.
Yeah, I love that tune, San Sebastian.
Oh yeah,
that's so beautiful, man. It's
thank you.
Really. Yeah. What's your process when writing? I mean, like, do you sit down, do you start with the melody, or like with some chord changes, or like do you collect daily ideas that you then scoop them up, or?
Yeah, well, everything is here, at the piano. I mean, as far as ideas taking shape and taking a direction, it's going to be on the piano. Although, for instance, like San Sebastian, that piece, it had nothing to do with the group of people I played with, but years prior to that, I played in the San Sebastian in Spain in that festival, and with some other musicians, and I was just inspired by the beauty of the place, and and that particular evening of performance. And so, music a lot of times, at least for me, it needs to find a proper, if possible, not proper sounds too sterile, but a particular place where it can live in a more full kind of manner. And so I think with all of these pieces, they were just kind of sitting there, and I'm backtracking a little bit, but Via Canonica was inspired by being on a tour with the Mingus dynasty, and we were in this European Italian city, and I was just I don't know, I have a love for the Italian Baroque,
sure.
and composers like that. And so anyway, then so the music, I get inspired by it, and then I tend to name something maybe later on, and I go, oh, this feels like this particular place. It can be a place or a thing, or thinking of someone or something like that. But anyway, so that's some of the process of composing.
Do you write down ideas like on a daily basis? I mean, do you sit behind the piano like regarding composition, or?
No, I don't. I play nearly every day. I mean, for myself, and as far as compositionally, it goes in phases. And if I have something,
a project, right? Yeah.
A project, and I'm not a commissioned composer. I mean, so much of my life has been as a pianist, as a sideman, and I'm very grateful for it. And these days, I'm really, really busy, but I find I'm going, wow, I don't have hardly. I have to make time to compose. So I miss that a bit, but it's an important part of my life, but it's also not my breadwinner.
Sure.
I make over the years, I mean, just occasionally a little bit of money from composing, but anyway, that's the balance of life. It's quite all right, but I would prefer to have a bit more time. Another part of it, though, is I get the idea sitting at the piano, and oddly enough, it's an odd little inside thing, but when I sit down, like before a gig or at a sound check, I'll sit down and I'll start playing, and often I'll get an interesting idea, just a short, maybe it's a chord and a melody or a certain sound or something, and I'll record it on my iPhone, and
That's smart,
and then it's been really good because I've been able to develop some ideas like that over time. I mean, probably same for you and a lot of people, just a lot of ideas, but to carry them through, I wish I was composing every day, but like I said, I made a choice many years ago that I love playing piano and I want to play a lot. And I think I could have had a good career as a composer, but that's a whole nother thing. But people do both. I mean, I do both, but anyway, it's part of the process. Yeah.
No, but I think every musician, I've done now these interviews with more than 300 players, right? And I think it's like 70% of us, I mean, like including myself, we're project oriented. Like unless we don't have a, like, okay, in September I'm recording. I write down this daily ideas or whatever idea I have, but I will not sit down and write the whole piece. Like very rarely this happens. But if I know there's a date, you'll be like, okay, shit, I need a ballad, I need this, like, and then it goes like this, right? So
well, the pressure of a certain amount of pressure, well, you have to get it done by this time, and that's a good thing. But it's a really, that's it's choices, I guess, we make.
Definitely. I mean, it's fun, composing. I also love it, but on the other hand, it's also like this bizarre little world being at home, with a sheet of music or a computer, and they're like, what to do now, right? Or
it's true. It's necessary to have isolation. In other words, just time, and a certain amount of uninterrupted time. Because I'll get spots like, certainly during the week where I have some time, but it's to really carry something through, and you stick with it, or you put it on the front burner, and other things are in the back as they need to be for that amount of time. But it's interesting.
It's quite an interesting observation always, just to talk to players about composition and band leading and all this. It's like especially composition. I mean, it's an interesting one. So but you mentioned that, like, you decided years ago that you want to play the instrument, but can we go just like way back? Probably what was the moment for you, like, that you wanted to dig into jazz and improvisation? I mean, did you have like a specific, I think many of us have like that moment that you heard a specific album or artist. Did you have like that thing? Or
I did. Did. I had an interest in music since I was a little boy, and but I was not a studied or trained musician. I did take some lessons when I was a kid, but I actually quit, and my father was very upset about it. But then he was okay with it. But I continued playing by ear, and my oldest brother was a musician, like a rock band. This is like late 60s and early 70s. And he was inspiring to me, So I had inspiration in that way. I kept playing piano, and everything by ear. But then when I was 15 years old, my father introduced me to a pianist musician in my hometown, which is a very small town in North Dakota. I mean, there's like culturally, it's got its own thing, its own culture, but it's not urban. It's not big in that sense. Yet there was still is a teachers college there that attracted students from all over the country and Canada as well. And so this particular guy, his name is Keith Triquare, he was playing with the guitarist. He's from Canada, and he was playing with the guitarist from Boston. And they had a duo, and they played some gigs in my hometown at this one bar, for instance. And my father heard him play and loved the music. My father's not a musician, but he thought, oh, you know, I should see if he would teach my son. And so he said, sure, you know, and so from that first lesson, when I heard him play, I go, that's what I want to do. Exactly, you know, and it was that I think I was headed there already, I would say, because I had musical thoughts and kind of compositional thoughts, but totally, like, not completely uneducated, but just
sure.
And then I started taking lessons with him, and he opened up this whole world of Oscar Peterson and Heath Jarrett, Chick Corea, Miles Davis, and just, I mean, in this tiny little town and, you know, agricultural community, and it you know, just changed my life. And then it's just continued from that day, you know. So I'm very, very blessed. It's like who you hear, who you meet, who nurtures you know, to continue on a path. So it's good, you know.
Yeah, that one moment, it's always like you need someone to guide you, and then, yeah, that's so important. Did you transcribe then those guys? Like you mentioned Keith and Oscar Peterson, like, or did you just listen?
I just listened. I've never been a big transcriber. I've done a little bit, but I was certainly influenced by, and, you know, there's things that pop out occasionally in my playing that are, you know, certainly influenced by these players. But yeah, I wasn't a transcriber, but I listened over and over and over again, and it would, you know, maybe through osmosis, it would just pop through.
Yeah.
And some things I would go, oh, I would do that, but not hire solos or anything like that. Ideas, you know, and those go a long way. A couple of ideas.
Oh man, sure. Sure,
Yeah.
Definitely. I think Joe Lovano once said, like, just listen to music. You don't even have to transcribe it. Just listen to a player for a long time, and basically you'll get it, like you said.
Yeah, I think,
or, you know, subconscious.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's it's a kind of maybe a human phenomenon that that we can be affected by something outside of us so strongly, and then it comes out. But yeah, that's been, and then of course, along with that, I went to I did also start taking classical lessons in high school, but I couldn't really read very well or anything, but I continued that into college, and I became a studied, you know, musician. I was a jazz musician, but I was studying classical music and everything. I mean, I'm very greatly affected by all kinds of music, but so I study, you know, but
sure.
you know.
When did you actually decide to move to New York? How did that happen?
Yeah, that was a desire since I was a little kid, to do that. But my wife and I, who's a musician as well, and we met in music school in Denver. That's where I went to the university there.
Oh, okay.
And we met in music school, and then shortly after we both graduated, we got married, and we were in Denver for like 12 years. So, and it was always a desire to get to New York, you know. And so in 1989, we before we went to New York, we decided to go to Europe and kind of check that out. And so my wife's oldest sister at the time was, and her husband were both successful and very active opera singers in Germany.
Oh, wow.
We're in a really good scene there. And so that was our home base. And so I had a few other contacts that in Germany. And so we ended up spending a lot of time in Stuttgart, and I met some very good, great musicians, very good people and friends to this day. And so we were there like 7 months, and we were contemplating, oh, maybe we should live here. But the thing was, it's like we discovered that, even though the appreciation of music was greater than here, more, a better understanding, just I think in the general population. Yeah. But the deciding factor was, it's still all scenes, local scenes are somewhat the same, Yeah. You have to get gigs, and you have to, yep. And you have to sit in, and you have to do all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, I mean, I've already been doing that in Denver for years. I'm established in Denver, but to go to kind of in Germany is great musicians. But so we go, okay, we need to go to New York. And so we moved back for a few months to Denver, and then we just did the big move, and that was in 1990. And
already,
so
wow, okay.
As far as living in New York directly, we don't. We're right across the river from Manhattan. But prior to that, we lived kind of in between Philadelphia and New York. So I played a lot of years, more so in Philly, in those first like 12 to 15 years that we're out here. We've been out here 33 years, but wow. And then we've been up here for 16 years. And so it's just, now, and that, so it was even a kind of a longer journey to be here directly. And this is direct, okay, it's not New York City, but
yeah, sure.
It's right there. I mean, and I'm on the scene for a long time. And
yeah.
So
who were the first connections in the scene that you made, actually? I mean, obviously, like there are like tons of piano players, so it's like, who were the first people you kind of got connected with and got gigs with?
Well, I as far as like New York City, I think the thing is I, even though we weren't living here, I had played up here. Well, when I started playing with Pat Martino, I met him, of course, through Philadelphia.
I want to touch that, the Pat connection also later.
Through, the gigs I played with them in the 90s were, those were the biggest gigs of, that I'm playing at the time for sure. And, the well-known clubs in the city. But prior to that, I mean, it's just, I was making trips, up to the city on my own and sitting in a bit.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And also I took like a composition course through there's BMI, which is a licensing organization. Things like that. I was just keeping my foot in here. And I had actually played in New York in the 80s with a touring group. And that, of course, was like, oh, God, I got to be here. And so I was very hungry for that. And I met, Claudio Roditi. It was
really? Oh, wow.
And Michelle Camilo. I met them in Denver when they were touring with Paquito de Rivera. And so in the 80s, I would kind of pop in and hang with them a little bit and, trying to get in,
Sure, man, yeah.
But I was still a bit too far away to get in, I mean, it wasn't just on my playing alone. I guess I wasn't at that spot yet, but, and then I got numbers from from some other musicians who were very kind to give me some numbers. And so I made some calls, and I did. And those calls that I made turned out to be fruitful to just, some musicians in the Philly and New York area. I mean, they're close enough that kind of cross paths from time to time. But yeah, another thing I have to say, when we moved out here, I was 31. So I wasn't 21. And I'd already
different.
It was different. And I had toured with a group out of Denver all over the country, and they were a jazz vocal group called Rare Silk, kind of not the mold of Manhattan Transfer, but excellent. And so I already had, I wasn't real young. I was, in my early 30s. And so I was already coming in. I know who I am. I don't, I'm not trying to discover who I am in New York or Philadelphia or anywhere else. I was kind of blessed with that kind of drive, and I knew I had a voice that was still developing, but I had a voice.
Yeah.
I had enough of something individual and an individuality so that's a little bit different when you come in on a scene. I was confident. I wasn't. I mean, I have humility, but I was confident.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. And I think that helped me along the way too. Plus, I wasn't just gonna. I said yes to a lot of gigs. I did club dates. I did, I did weddings and bar mitzvahs and things like that. But that was never, ever the focus. It was about the art. It's about playing and meeting, and playing with great players. And it started to grow, over the years. I mean, one other thing in retrospect, I would say, and my wife and I talk about this a long time. I mean, we're together all these years, man. She's a great lady.
Wow.
She's my best friend in that way too.
That's beautiful, yeah.
We're both musicians, but in retrospect, it would have been like, well, why didn't we move to the city right away? But I don't need to go into all of that, but it's interesting. So, and it's been fruitful all these years of not living in the city, but now that we're here, it's just, it feels like, oh, we kind of arrived finally because people, as soon as they knew that we were here, it's like, oh, and I got calls within a week, even though, hey, I'm only 65 miles away.
Yeah.
But, it's that proximity and it's New York. There's tons of great players. So kind of have to be on it. But anyway.
Well, I think, everything comes how it's meant to be in a sense. I know what you mean. It's like, but you mentioned Pat Martino. I mean, how did that first connection begin? Actually, I mean, obviously he was from Philadelphia, and how did you meet on a session, or like how did that story with Pat begin?
Yeah, well, that's the fruits of actually playing a lot in Philadelphia first. I mean, and that was the scene that I was on. First, and so I was playing a little club in Philadelphia, and a jazz gig, and it was like the gig was like okay, I wasn't that thrilled by the gig itself, right? Just saying that's my own judgment of it, but you never know who's listening.
Sure.
And it turns out Pat was in with a friend, and just checking out some music, and I ended up talking to him on the break. I knew who he was, but I didn't know that much about him. Honestly, I knew that he had some very serious health issues.
Yeah.
But in college, there was a guitarist who was like a Pat Martino nut. And so I knew about Pat through that. But honestly, I didn't know how heavy he was in that sense. And I didn't have any of his records. anyway, he was very kind. He liked my playing, and he gave me his number. And he said, you know, let's get together. And it was like, wow, this is great. So like a month or so later, this was in 1992, then I went to his home in South Philly, you know, where he lived for many years. I mean, that's where he grew up with his folks too. They had passed away, but yeah, and then it started to develop from there. And of course, the first time I heard him play, man, it was just like,
Yeah.
and it was cool too, Samo, because like I said, I wasn't innocent, but I don't know his playing really. But you know when you're playing with somebody heavy, and it was just like he right away was this kind of dark, deep sound, and it was like I go, wow, you know. And we had a really good chemistry, like right away. And he dug my playing, and of course I loved his playing, but more important that he likes my playing.
Man,
so you know,
in that case, yeah.
So because he's an elder and I'm new on that scene of things, and but it was fantastic. And like a year and a half later, I started recording with him, and he was still coming out of his health crisis. So he had already had brain surgery and stuff, but he was certainly healthy enough, but I think the music to come back brought him up, you know, that as it does for all of us, you know, makes us healthier as long as we're not doing too much other stuff, you know, that's getting in the way. But yeah.
When you said you started recording with Pat, like that first record, that's with Mark Johnson, right? On bass also, and that one with Sherman Ferguson.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
What was that like for you? Like being in the same room with Mark, you know, who played with Bill Evans, and I mean with everyone. He's like the monster on the instrument.
Yeah. Well, in that sense, like that, when Pat told me Mark was on the session, I was kind of like, that really got me, just because I knew that, you know, he played with Bill Evans. And anyway, it was that was cathartic. It was a big moment to do that session, because that was, and I played with a lot of great musicians before that and at that time, but they weren't well known like Pat. And so indeed, Pat is the first, you know, really big jazz musician that I ever recorded with. And then, you know what, it was all done in one day. There was no rehearsal. Pat and I rehearsed the tunes at his home, but he sent the music to Mark and Sherman Ferguson, and then we just ran through it once, each tune, and then we recorded it. And it was like the pure, like that kind of old school way of recording, you know, and which was also a heavy thing, because I had read about that, I knew about that. And so it's like, you got to bring your game like right away. And it was beautiful, man. It was just that was a milestone moment for me, you know, to be in that. And everybody was very cool. You know, Mark was a really, really nice guy, and Sherman as well. And yeah, I was very grateful, but I knew, you know, that's an affirming moment. It was an affirming moment to meet Pat, and then to get together with him in a duet setting for like 6 months or something, just playing. And I knew this is going somewhere, but I don't quite know where, you know. And then it solidified into 3 recordings that same year. And then his health was getting better and better. And then we started playing gigs, you know, and I played with him for 10 years.
Wow.
You know, different quartet and duet. And then I stopped playing with him. I needed another direction. And eventually I just stopped, because I needed to do that. But
yeah, sure.
All good, you know.
Yeah. Did you go to Europe also with him? You played everywhere, right? Yeah.
We played the a number of places. We played the North Sea Jazz Festival, and we played in Germany, and also like a tour in London, and then a couple of Scandinavian countries, and Warsaw, Poland, and yeah, a number of gigs in Europe, and then a little bit in oh yeah, Japan. We played 2 times, 2 tours, and then some duet gigs in Sao Paulo. We did a duet gig there at a festival in Canada. So yeah, it was nice, man. I got around with Pat. That was and I got to play. You know, it was a playing.
Oh man, that's it. Yeah, yeah.
He was old school that way. Where did you ever meet him or talk with him?
No.
He is great, but I mean, he was very. When he would talk, he would be very philosophical and, you know, kind of, what's the term? Like, I mean, he had such a following of guitarists that he was kind of guitar god. And so he kind of had this aura about him, right? So he would philosophize, and which was great. And at times it was funny because I think he'd get so like way over there, he'd start laughing, and he said, "What were we talking about?" You know, he forgot because he was winding it. But then the reason I bring it up is the contrast of him being an old school, you know, from that era, the generation before him, and because he started playing so young, he would not say much about the music, hardly at all. When new players would come in, they'd have you know, he would provide the music to them, but it was like, hey, how you doing? And then he would basically count it off and start playing. And it was interesting because he wasn't detailed about, oh, you should be playing this and, you know, da-da-da. And he could, of course, but so he was very verbal in this way. And then in another way, it was just all about the playing.
Yeah.
The music, and it was like, kind of bring your stuff, and if he didn't dig it, you knew, but he wouldn't he was just kind of quiet in that way, oddly enough, but he gave, you know, it was a real, not to sound strange, but it was a real jazz gig in a way. It was instrumental music, and it's like you know, I got the spirit from him. It's like if he took 4 choruses on some tune, it's like I go, well, I'm going to take 4 choruses or 5, you know. And it wasn't competitive, but it was the spirit of it.
Yeah.
And he was like 100% cool, man. He just he loved what I did. But and I'm forever grateful for having that experience, because that's, you know, there's a lot of gigs where, just say on a local scene, where they're jazz gigs, but you can't necessarily stretch that much. There's some other things that extraneous that the management or club or something, and so he was well known, and he was really appreciated for what he did, and so it was about playing, and you know. That, God, what a fantastic gig to have as, you know, as instrumentalist.
Oh man, yeah.
Just play. You don't, you know, it's not about holding back. It's not about trying to satisfy anybody. It's like, you're here to do this thing and play, and that had a huge effect on me as you know, I mean, in my 30s, but I'm still a developing musician, and it gave me, you know, even more confidence. And also, I just learned a lot just being on the road with him.
Yeah.
Good things, challenging things, not so good things, just life, you know. And so he was a good teacher in a lot of ways, you know.
How was it on the road with him? I mean,
overall it was very cool. He was a good
band leader,
you know, I mean, a good band leader, and I liked his company a lot, you know, and we got along really well. I mean, it's just sometimes the challenges, I don't know, it's like the challenges of his own life where I was very close to him, but I didn't know everything about him.
Sure. Yeah.
And, he was also, and what I mean by that is he was also complex, sometimes complicated, like what's going on here? I mean, where emotions and things like that, where you go, okay, well, I don't know what that's about, and you kind of have to, he's the band leader, he's an elder, and so I have that respect for older musicians. I grew up that way with elders, but also it's kind of like you have to, when something's going on that's like has nothing to do with you, but they're kind of wielding this power, and you go, there's something out of proportion here. That I'm putting it in a way of not being specific because I don't want to do that.
Yeah, sure. But I know what you mean. I've played with some elders also, and I know what you mean.
And you kind of have to give them some room, but you also have to be yourself and take care of yourself. So you either leave or you get into it with them, and that happened to both. That happened with me with Pat a few times, but it was good. Yeah. It was all. I look at it. It was positive in the end, and we always were, remained really, really good friends. I wish I had kind of seen him more often now that he's passed, but we stayed in contact, and I'm forever grateful to him. Yeah.
How did you, in the midst of playing with Pat, decide you did that record 5 minutes to Madness and Joy, right? Like while you were still with Pat.
Yes.
Like when was that moment that you said like, okay, I want to do something on my own also? Did you do already something prior to that?
That's my very first record. But that was simultaneous, and the thing was, it was not in conflict with touring with Pat. That wasn't, which I was very conscious of that. I didn't, and it wasn't musicians that he used, or there wasn't any potential, conflicts of interest or anything. But no, and he also knew that I was a composer in that. Because he played, recorded some of my tunes too, and that's also how he. We were playing, we had met, but then I was playing some gigs in Philly, and he would come out to those gigs. Obviously, that's how he heard me. But even with some, more kind of digging in, playing kind of gigs, and where he would hear my own music, he was very also respectful of it, but also supportive of that, and as it should be. He was protective in some other ways about kind of, which raised some difficulties, kind of like where my career was going. I don't want to go into that.
Mm-hmm.
I could, but I don't think I will. It's not some negative, some challenging things at the time, but it was like, okay, whatever,
no
a path. Everybody's got their path, and especially,
oh man, definitely,
and and I think, especially in this art form, I think you have to allow people to have, room, for their own expression.
Sure.
Not only with your own music, but, and I've never been in a situation. My career has been as a sideman. I also do my own gigs, but I'm not. I won't be in a situation like Pat, where he was a leader, and so if he dug these players, he would want to keep them. And if they start kind of pushing outside of it, sometimes leaders get a little freaked out.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
Definitely.
Interesting.
Yeah. No. But I wanted to ask you also, you know, watch on YouTube, like there's a lot of footage of you playing duo stuff, you know, with Francois Moutin and Dean Johnson
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
and I, there's one with Peter Bernstein that I really dig.
Oh yeah,
And it's so different because Peter plays so, I mean, you know, him and Pat Martino,
yeah.
they're completely different players. And I love how you sound so original also with Peter. And like, how did you hook up with Peter? And man, this is something you should record actually.
Well, I love his playing in that aspect because I've known about him for a lot of years, but he's not somebody that I knew was playing that well. But you know, I have to hats off to Pat Martino because all these guitar players, like, they know me, they know my name through Pat. So I mean, it's kind of a gift that keeps on giving. And I think I'd met him years ago, but just, you know, like yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah, just it was during the pandemic.
Mm.
I had played you know, Mesro. You've heard of Mesro?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, things were opening up, and so I had played a gig, and then as I was walking back just where the bar is, Peter was there, and I, you know, don't really know him, but I just introduced myself and said, "Hey, you know, it's you know, nice to meet you." And I guess we had met, but he was really, if you know him, he's really nice guy.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy. Yeah.
And very open. And so we were just chatting for a bit, and we were talking. He said, "Yeah, we should." I forget, or we should play at some point. And I said, "Well, that'd be great." And so I offered him because I was playing at Soapbox
Yeah.
on a monthly basis, which was a godsend during the pandemic, really special. And that's how it worked out. And he said, "Yeah, it'd be great." And so, you know, so we just you know, just exchanged some tunes, and we just played. And I happened to see him last night.
Oh, really? Oh,
I played there was a memorial in the city for this singer named Roz Terell, who you wouldn't necessarily know, but
yeah,
she was
the name,
yeah, very well loved, and so you know all these players, but Peter was playing, and Dave Stryker,
Mm.
Gilad Heckelsman. Is that? I think that was it. I mean, there might have been one other good. Anyway, all these players that had played with Roz, and we were all, you know, and I'd worked with her. But anyway, it was great to see Peter, so I talked with him for a minute. I would love to do more playing with him. I love his playing, his spare,
Yeah.
more spare, but it's like so intentional and so grooving. I mean, it's just yeah, I would welcome that, just because it's like it's a different kind of center, like you're saying with Pat.
Yeah.
It was like it's more about this kind of force, and it's this kind of constancy of brilliance, but it's constant, except on ballads. Pat would have space, but Peter, it's like it's just like he's just got this thing, and really captivating, I think, you know.
Well, it's not nice to hear you in that context. You know, with Pat, like you said, you know, and it's completely different, and it's so beautiful to hear, you know, like two different approaches, and how you also approach it, and
yeah,
gel with these two players both times, but you know, obviously in a different way. So it's beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I have to say it's the beauty of, well, being a freelancer, but you know, in New York, it's amazing where you can cross paths with so many players, and you can play with a lot of different players.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if it gets to like who's not going to be on the local scene is somebody like Pat Metheny, who wouldn't that be great for me to play with Pat Metheny, but I'm not, that's only going to happen only if the gods get together and say, you know, so, but everybody else, it's like, you know, Mike Stern, of course, who's like very open and who I just played with at his home, and I saw a lot at the 55 bar. But the point being is that so many people are open to playing, in the city, and so that has provided me to play with these sometimes very different styles of great guitar players or horn players, bass players, just like, wow, like, this style of bass playing, it's like apples and oranges, but very different. And then you kind of go, where do you sit being yourself, but also like, it's just playing with other people. You have to be willing to move a little bit, not be rigid, I think.
Yeah. Well, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's incredible. Like, I don't know who I talked to. Like, well, I think it was maybe Drew Grass, and we played together, a couple of times and toured a little. And he said, like, when he came to New York, I don't know who, I think it was a piano player who wrote down his number in a book, and and he said, like, yeah, I'll give you a call. And it was like this notebook, and he was like on the position 97 or something, and above him it was like Eddie Gomez and like everyone. Like, he was like, I'm never gonna get called. And eventually, of course, he got, but it's like what you said, it's scary, man. It's like, just fuck, man, this is all these players out there, you guys playing every night, and just it's incredible still.
Yeah.
Even nowadays, New York, I mean, but
yeah. So many great players always.
Yeah. Jim, I also wanted to ask you about the door in a field.
Oh, yeah.
And what was the story behind there? Like, speaking of all the immense players that you played with and the number, there are some, like, Wayne Krantz is there, like, among others. And what was the story behind that project? I mean,
well, that the door in a field is there's two records, 1 and 2, and it's all in dedication and inspiration to where I grew up in North Dakota, which was, I grew up on a farm. I mean, I wasn't born on a farm, but my grandparents were, I'm of Czech and Norwegian heritage. And
wow. Okay, that's a compliment.
They're one side is first generation here, others are, but and both farming, agricultural, families. And I grew up with that. I mean, simultaneously of, my love of music, I was also just more typical of in sports and all this kind of thing, but I was also working on my parents' farm since I was a little kid, working with cattle, and farming, wheat and oats and all this kind of stuff. So I did a lot of, and I loved it. I did a lot of hard work, which it's just normal.
Sure.
But, I grew up working with my brothers and my sister and my parents, my grandparents on my father's side. And just absolutely beautiful country, of which us kids, my parents are gone, but us kids still have land that we got from our parents and grandparents. And it's just an amazing way of life.
Yeah.
And these records are, I knew that, let me backtrack a little bit. I knew that my path being a musician, I could not live there anymore. Not unless, because I wanted to play.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be in urban cities and tour and things like that. So I think my connection is through my music of dedication, and writing. They're essentially tone poems.
Yeah.
Kind of in that, especially in the 19th century of classical music, of writing about, it's not only that period, but I think it was all periods, but it's essentially the same for me. And so the records and a door in a field is just, it's a little bit of this esoteric but still earthy
Yeah.
symbol of this kind of doorway into this other life for me. So it's very strong in me. If I wasn't into music, I very well may have become a farmer. I don't know,
Oh, sure.
because I love that way of life, but they're so different. And so the compositions are have that shape, and it's not so much with the exception of a couple tunes, it's not about the blowing so much. It's more about the vibe, and it's still jazz, but it's you know,
Capture the spirit. Yeah.
yeah, it's that direction and that spirit, and which is great. I mean, that's a part of my composing life, and also this other side of my playing, which, in a way, as jazz musicians and especially instrumentalists, it's like, you want to be able to. It's important that people know how we play, and that you can really blow, you can hang, you can do all this stuff. Now, those records, if somebody hears that and they don't hear anything else, they're going to go, they might say, I love it, but, what about I don't hear any straight ahead. I mean, I don't hear any.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
And, but that's also like, I go, well, in a sense, I don't care about that, because it's like, that's not my intention. My intention is my compositions, but this particular message, we all have messages with our music. Even when it's about blowing, it's like, well, if it's a virtuosic piece, it's like, well, that's what it is. I mean, you're not going to go, no, it's like, that's incredible chops. It still moves me, but it's still about a lot about technique. And these records are not. And so I also chose the musicians who I felt like they can,
do that.
Incredible improvisers, but they're also, they know what my intention is and was, I mean, it at the time they knew it, so the difference, I think that's key to it as well, So.
Yeah, but you listen to a Bill Frisell record and a Bill Frisell record, and people would say like, he's just like, but it's just like a project that he does, and then he does something else. So I think it's good that you show these different varieties of what you can do, and that's important. It keeps us going also,
Yeah, and it's I think it's and it I mean, in a sense I need to do that. I mean, as an artist, it's like and it's there's no money in this stuff. I mean, I would like that. Wouldn't it be great that these records were on like a major label or something like that? But that's also like, well, yeah, but I would like that, but that's still not my initial intention.
Yeah.
That I know if that were the case, though, it would provide. It would make some things, as we well know, in life easier, and there'd be more bread and stuff. But that's a whole nother subject. But you realize, though, with that kind of support behind an artist, it's like you go, well, that's why we know about that artist,
Yeah.
I mean, John Coltrane, for instance, I've thought about this from time to time. What if nobody, like, and this is not historically true, the record labels did pick him up, and there were these small labels and then bigger labels, and they really produced a lot of his stuff. But what if nobody had, or just they did one record and then it kind of fell? That doesn't make any sense, because we know somebody like that had to be all over the world in terms of people knowing about him, his music. But if he didn't have that support, we wouldn't know about this.
Oh man, sure.
And there's a lot of artists that it would be nice if they knew. I'm not just take myself out of it, just like so many.
No, but it's
players,
it's just like you know that's why I like making interviews with players like yourself, you know, who've been doing this for a really long time as sidemen and as band leaders. And you know, it's like I think everyone I talk to should deserve wider recognition. You know, I don't know, I talked the other day to Harold Danko.
Oh wow.
And
Yeah.
you know, I mean, he's done like 40 records or 30 records, and
Yeah.
like hardly anyone knows about him. Or I mean, musicians know about him, but like if you talk to younger people, you know, students, like, or like I could just go naming people who are like that, you know, and you know, that's why I like talking to you guys, just to maybe provide some more exposure. I don't know, just to you
Thank
know,
you.
because every one
Yeah.
of you is like, you know, such great
Yeah.
players and composers and band leaders. Yet, like you said, if there's no like this label and the whole industry, of course, it's a different question than
Yeah.
issue. Like you know, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but that's also how life is. But I for myself, it's just I live overall, I have a very good life. I mean, it's edgy financially at times, but that's also like that being said, it's like I'm fulfilled like every year. And I feel like every year, you know, God willing, chops and mind and all that stuff and body, I keep getting better. I keep, you know, more, or it's more focused, it's more refined. And that's what I like. I like the refinement of the elder musicians, that as their young stuff is always incredible, but just even hearing like Herbie Hancock, like on some, there was that did you happen to catch any of that tribute to Chick Corea? That was at yeah, it was it was earlier this year, and they had to cancel it because of COVID. But it was like a 4-hour concert. They did it 2 nights at Jazz at Lincoln Center.
Oh, wow.
And a tribute to Chick, and Patitucci put the whole thing together. But all these great drummers, you know, players that were in his life. And Herbie played a trio with Patitucci and Brian Blade. And one tune was like close to 15 minutes. I mean, and it was just, you know, Herbie wasn't going to go, oh, you know, we got to keep it here. But it just his like that older musician thing of this, there's a bit more space and less chops in it, but the depth was just like, I go, wow. And that's, you know, that's the path I want to continue on if things go that way, of just, you know.
It's like you listen to Wayne Shorter and his quartet.
Yes.
I listen to a lot lately, and it's just like, man.
Yes, exactly. Just like, wow.
Wow. Yeah.
The notes. Yeah. Hey, do you know this? Do you know this bass player Jay Anderson?
Oh, sure. I did this interview with like 2 weeks ago with Jay. I love Jay, man.
Really? Yeah. Oh, great. And I play with Jay, you know, on and off, and lately more often. But man, just speaking of like well, such a great player, and he said this too, which was, as the years go on, I think he's like choosing to not play as much. I mean, in his concept, like less is more. I don't know if he talked about that, but in playing with him, I'm always amazed by, like, I go, just different style. He's not all over the place. He can do that. Of course, he's a virtuoso, but the depth of his groove and his choice of notes, and it's just like, kind of like Peter Bernstein in a way. It's just like this very deep thing. And it's like, I go, every time I play with Jay, I just kind of go, oh, I get something from that. I want to, in my own playing, or at least within some tunes, of trying to be more, even if it's an intense tune, not to say have to say so much.
Yeah.
As much. You could say more and less notes or whatever. But Jay's a
Well,
great example.
yeah. Yeah, there's or Frizzell for me. It's like you know.
Yeah, great. So
you know, he plays one note and it's like, damn, you play the G on a G major chord and it's it still sounds amazing. You know, it's like with
yes,
your,
yeah,
like,
yeah, exactly. That's another great example of his
yeah.
just amazing.
I mean, so many
things.
guys like that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But cool.
yeah, incredible.
Jim, just to not to take more of your time, I wanted to ask you what's still in the schedule for you for this year. I mean, for the upcoming weeks or months. What are the projects
Oh yeah.
you're involved with?
Well, I this Saturday I'm playing with Houston Person. You familiar
Really?
with Houston?
Whoa.
Yeah,
Oh
the
man.
tenor player.
Yeah.
I'm not in his band, but the bassist that has played with him for many years, a great bass player named Matthew Parrish, plays with Houston, and so I occasionally play some gigs, you know, with
Wow.
Houston, and that's great because he's just such a Houston is just this soulful, you know, I mean, it's not necessarily bebop, but it's like this soulful jazz play, you know. I mean, so
beautiful. Wow.
yeah, so that's very cool. It's just one night at a festival, and then next week I'm playing with Joe Locke, the vibraphonist,
Oh
who I've
wow.
played with Joe for a number of years now. I'm in his group and we play a lot together. And I'm playing with Joe and this great singer on the West Coast. His name is Kenny Washington. It's not the drummer, but it's the vocalist who's a fantastic singer. So we're doing a trio gig in two places outside of San Francisco. So so that's great. And then a few more gigs coming up with Joe. And then I've had like the past, just recently I played with Tim Armacost. I love his playing, and he's got a new record out. And so we did a couple of gigs. I did a couple of gigs with this quintet, and then yeah, just a few of my own gigs, and I work with this great singer named Paul Jost, who's I work with him a lot, and Dean Johnson and Tim Horner are in that group, and so we do you know, quite a few gigs together, and then I have some stuff in Europe in the fall, like in October. I'll be I'm teaching a week. I did 1 week in March at this Prince Claus Conservatory.
In
it's
Rotterdam.
In Groningen, yeah, in Netherlands. So, and so I'm doing that for a week again, which is great. And then I'll be playing in London and Ireland and possibly Spain.
Wow.
This drummer Stephen Keogh, who's he's Irish, but he's based in Valencia, Spain. Anyway, so I have some nice travels.
Quite busy. Wow, yeah.
Yeah, it's been this past year has been real busy, and kind of new things have opened up. I mean, the 55 bar that closed, unfortunately, and I played there like, man, a lot. I had a residency there for about 5 years, and that's kind of a deep hit, but you know, other things have opened up.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So it's really good. You know, I have no idea what next year is like.
Oh, sure, man. Yeah. But beautiful.
Hope it keeps going, and but it's all good. It's a good forward motion, and I mean, for years.